Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I guess we're live now. I'm Margie Wolf. I'm the publisher of Second Story Feminist Press. I want to welcome you on this International Women's Day, which I love, I love, I love. Um, and I love the idea of this panel, Can You Hear Me Now, on intersectional feminism. When I started in publishing, feminist publishing in 1977, it never occurred to me that 45 years later, we would still need a feminist publishing house. We thought we knew all the issues, we thought we knew all the work that needed to be done. But as I said, 45 years later, Second Story is here. And what is quite extraordinary, I think, is that every day we hear about wonderful, wonderful stories, issues, struggles, contributions, accomplishments from a great variety of women that I never knew anything about 45 years ago. And it makes the work wonderful because we can bring these they're not new voices. They're voices that have been around for a long time, but more and more now we're hearing them. And we're celebrating all of the differences that we bring to the table in the literature that Second Story publishes, which is feminist, social justice, human rights books for kids. We're very proud of the kids list because we probably are the preeminent publisher of social justice material, women's material for young people. We have books that have been translated in over 40 languages, nearly 50 countries. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sue Carter, who is going to be our moderator today. Sue is now the deputy editor of the Inuit Art Quarterly. I know her, of course, best from being the editor-in-chief of Quill and Quire, which is the publishing industry public voice in many ways. Publication for years. She's written for every major magazine that we know and newspapers, the Toronto Star, the Globe, Maclean, Chatelaine, Where. She's even written for fashion magazines. Anyways, she's done a lot of writing. Walrus, Toronto Life, etc. So the table is now all yours, Sue.
Oh, thank you so much. And it really is an honor. I know I'm not books 24/7, mostly pleasure now, although I still get to do some books writing. But I've always respected so much what Second Story Press does and its mandate. And so it's thrilling for me that I'm still allowed to be included in publishing panels with the amazing writers. And I even wore my In Dolly We Trust shirt in honor of the day.
Very nice. Very nice.
Starting off on a positive note. What I would like to do is, first of all, welcome everybody. We're thrilled that you could join us. Before we go any further, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. All of us today, all of our panels actually, well, maybe 3 of us are the same area. Kate, I think you are in London. So no, we're a little bit geographically separated. We're all on different territories, but the women of Second Story Press would like to recognize the ancestral lands on which they work and live. And that the building that houses their office is at 20 Maud Street. And it's situated in traditional territories, including those of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Métis, and Mississaugas of the New Credit, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So I'm really, again, honored to be able to have this conversation tonight. Before I get started, though, I just have a few housekeeping details to go over. The format this evening is going to be a discussion between all of the panelists, and at the end there'll be time for Q&A. So feel free at any time to type your questions into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. If you think of something in the middle of a conversation, that's okay. You don't have to wait to the end to put it in. Feel free to do that. And if you want to also tell us where you're from, we'd love to know where everybody is tonight. So if there's any technical problems, you can also just let us know, and somebody will take care of it. Also, there is a draw. I'm not sure if everybody saw. There's still time to enter for a package of books. There's a registration form that in the description that you can fill out. And then the winner will receive copies of all of the authors' books tonight. So that's very exciting as well. Speaking of books, I also want to mention our co-host for this evening, which is Another Story Bookshop, another staple in the Toronto community, another favorite of mine that I still visit, even though I have moved to the other side of the city. All of the authors' books are available at Another Story, and you can visit them in person and shop online, and also at your favorite local bookstore. So now on to the main event, and I'm going to do a brief introduction to everybody, and then we'll get right into it. So first of all, Kate Graham researches, writes, speaks, and teaches about politics in Canada. She holds a PhD in political science and teaches in the political science department at Western and Huron University College. Kate is the creator and host of No Second Chances, a Canada 2020 podcast about the rise and fall of women in Canada's most senior political roles, a project which inspired her own political pursuits, which I do want to ask you about, and her book, Govern Like a Girl, The Women Who Became Canada's First Ministers. Kate lives with her partner, Jessie, and daughter, Flora, in London, Ontario. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you very much.
And next is Monique Gray Smith. Monique Gray Smith is Cree, Lakota, and Scottish, and a proud mom of teenage twins. She is an accomplished consultant, writer, and international speaker. And in fact, you were telling us before, you've already spoken today. This is your second speaking engagement today. Monique's most recent off novel, get that out, Tilly and the Crazy Eights, was longlisted for Canada Reads 2021. Monique has 7 books ranging for readers across the lifespan. These include Speaking Our Truth, A Journey of Reconciliation, My Heart Fills with Happiness, You Hold Me Up, Lucy and Lola, Tilly, A Story of Hope and Resilience, and recently released When We Are Kind. And finally, Kai Cheng Thom, hello, is a writer, performer, conflict mediator, queer healer, and I love this, a lasagna lover. This is the first time I've seen this in a bio. Me too. She's the author of 5 books in multiple genres, including Lambda Literary Award nominated novel Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, A Dangerous Trans Girls Confabulous Memoir, and the Triangle Award-winning essay collection I Hope We Choose Love, which is published by Arsenal Pulp Press. She's been featured in the New York Times, Teen Vogue, and on CTV's The Social, as well as in Emma Watson's Feminist Book Club. So Kai Cheng is a passionate advocate for women and trans people's rights. So welcome, everybody. It is International Women's Day. So I loved Margie's introduction to that. It's become a complicated day. So I went to buy myself flowers at Loblaws, and I didn't even realize it until I got home. But like it says, like Happy Women's Day on it. Selling a Women's Day cake in the bakery. So like, I don't know. I have some complicated feelings about what this day is now. And I'm kind of curious about your own personal feelings. If anyone wants to jump in, share how they feel.
Sure. Well, I too have felt so in this space. It's a real event.
That's unfortunate.
Can we try this?
No.
Hear me now?
It's still not working, I'm afraid.
Well, maybe we'll put you on mute for a minute. No worries. These things totally happen. So, and then maybe we have Michaela, magician backstage, who can help us out. No worries. It's all right. This is all good. So does anyone else have any, sort of observing how the day goes now? How you're feeling about it?
I can comment. I think we're still getting, almost sounds like aliens or something trying to come in. I think it is complicated, and I think as the years go on, it's going to get a little more complex yet as we begin to navigate, the truth of our lived experiences as human beings, that there aren't boxes for us to fit in. And historically, there was a box for women, right? And that, I think, has burst open. And so we're now figuring out a path forward about how do we honor those who identify as women on this day? And how do we honor those who choose to identify as women on this day? Because the world still 364 days of the year primarily focuses on those who identify as men. And so I think we still have to have a place that says to those little ones who are growing up and identifying as women, and those who are growing up and identifying however, that women are important. And to me, that's what this day means. It means like, let's pause and remember that, and especially with so much that's happening in our world right now, to remember that we're all important, that we're all sacred. And on this day, we are honoring those who identify as women, and we hold them up with dignity and respect. I'm just like Margie. I think it's a really important day. And in some ways, it still makes me sad, as Margie said, that 45 years later, we're still having to educate why this day is important, and that even this day is unfolding for some people. Yeah. So thank you, Sue.
Yeah. Kai Cheng, any feelings about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really agree with you, Monique, and with you as well, Sue, that the day is complicated. I wasn't raised really with an awareness of International Women's Day, and so only came into awareness of it as an adult. And when I did, it was sort of in the context of debate. So who could be allowed to be, celebrated as a part of International Women's Day? And even still today on social media, I saw, more than my share, I think, of debate, and also some like harsher dialogue than debate happening, contesting about and who should be prioritized. And I mean, the obvious thought that comes up for me, of course, is transgender women, other trans identified people whose presence is contested. But also, I think there's been a lot of conversations about, who does this day center in terms of, what kind of woman, or whose experiences as women on a racial level. Do those who identify as sex workers, are they also who do sex work? Sorry, are those women also centered on this day? What kind of feminism and what kind of world are we envisioning when we think about the world where we don't have to have this kind of day? Is a really hot button issue right now, and yeah, so I'm very curious to find out where we'll go.
I'm not sure if everybody saw that the theme for this year. So each year, I don't think this has always been the case, but this year has a theme which is break the bias. And so the way it's been described sort of officially is imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together, we can forge women's equality. Collectively, we can all break the bias. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this theme and what it means to your work, if it resonates with you.
Well, I could jump in there briefly.
Yeah, that would be great.
So this idea of break the bias is like hugely important to me. I think on at least a couple levels. And the first is, of course, there is so much discrimination and sort of like unthinking bias that happens out there in the world. I work in the sector of arts, also social services, consulting. I have a few different jobs, and in all of these roles and realms, I still see actually that men often dominate fields or the higher paying echelons or the leadership roles in all the various fields that I work in. And then even in those fields that tend to be woman dominated, it's still primarily white women who hold leadership or power or sort of the higher paying roles in those fields. And so, I don't think that anyone in, the field of the arts or healthcare or social services or consulting or any of the other fields in which bias is present would say necessarily, well, I hope they wouldn't, that, women aren't as valuable and that racialized women and gender diverse women aren't as valuable. But that is actually the bias that is happening and being felt in the real world with some really material, serious consequences for women who are marginalized or multiply marginalized. And so in all the kinds of work that I do, what interests me is having a conversation about why that bias is still happening and how it can be undone. And on a deeper level, even, I think having that conversation between people who identify as women. Some of the social media headlines that were coming my way today, for example, were conversations between women about who should be allowed to compete in various sporting arenas, or if the funding and activism efforts that go toward improving women's standards in the workplace are actually working for all women. And so, in some ways, I'm less interested in having the conversation with those who identify as men, because I want to know why women are still having trouble supporting one another, why we're still having trouble being all on the same team when we might share some of the same experiences and hopefully some of the same goals.
Yeah, what do you think, Monique?
I hadn't heard that theme, but I think that a lot of the bias is implicit and unaware. People aren't even aware of their biases. Yeah. And I think that some of that is because we are still living in a scarcity society. That a society that says, if just because we're talking about books as well, if my books sell really well, then maybe Kai Cheng's won't, right? And so then that just naturally puts us into competition instead of into collecting. And when we collect each other and when we hold each other up and when we say, well, if you liked my book, buy Kai Cheng's, buy Kate's book, right? Or you know what? I'm going to this gig today and I'm going to take 2 of my books and 2 of your books and 2 of your books and give those out, right? So that we are collecting the support of each other instead of that competition. And in that competition, we are dividing each other. And that's what I think is still wanted, because there's fear that if we actually get as powerful as we can be as a collective, it means that the lived experience of a huge part of this population in this world and their ancestral memory of their power is threatened. and they're not ready for that. So it's easier for them to then support the divide instead of also the collection. So I think that's where individually and with those we love, especially with those who are young in our lives, to remind them of the importance of collecting instead of competition. And it's not that competition can't be valuable in places, for sure. It can sometimes pull something out of us that might not have otherwise come out. But the more we can collect each other and lift each other up, then it's going to cause the biases to break down. Mm-hmm.
I see you all really as very generous people and supportive within your communities and with the writing communities and everything that you do that I see out in the world. Is it so much that it's, this scarcity or this lack of support is not so much between the writers, or is it sort of the infrastructures of publishing in a way, or the way that publishing is set up now that has sort of created this sort of environment?
Well,
can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, you're here.
Okay.
Yay! Awesome.
So I'm so sorry, everyone, for that. This is honestly classic, the challenges of female identified, working parents, professionals today. And I think speaks to the experience of so many. So my partner is a city councilor and is on a televised meeting downstairs. I'm up here trying to do an event. Our baby, we just got into the bath. This is IWD event number 5 for me, in and around work things. And so it's a scramble, right? All the time. And especially over the last 2 years where everyone's life has been thrown into chaos and people are just doing their best. I know you started, Sue, with a question, but how do we feel about today? On one hand, it's celebratory. On the other hand, I feel really quite bad for all of the things that we've all had to put up with. And of course, we know there's been women have been disproportionately affected. Trans women have been disproportionately affected. Women with disabilities have been disproportionately affected. Racialized women have been disproportionately affected. And the burden seems to fall more and more on the people who are struggling the most. And I'm just tired. And then my microphone didn't work. And so, sorry, but this is a bright spot in the day to get to have this discussion with 3 amazing people. So apologies for dropping off for a few minutes.
You never have to apologize with this group. Absolutely.
Well,
we're just glad you're here now.
Me too.
But it is like there is a certain amount, if you are doing all of this work and you're juggling all of these things, I can imagine at the end of the day, there isn't much left to give out again,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the last few years have really tested everyone. The experience has been a little bit different, but yeah, there needs to be some systemic change to address the things that are clearly not working. And the impact on parents is particularly close to my heart as the mom with an 18-month-old. So I hope that we're using this particular International Women's Day to really reflect on what are the barriers that we see that fall along gender lines that still exist, and do everything in our power to get those out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I saw today that was actually good on social media for International Women's Day is somebody created a gender pay gap bot. Yes. So for every single tweet that came from a company, like a corporation, it would then retweet it with the gender pay gaps between men and women, which was like fabulous. I thought, no, there is a good use of technology. It was interesting because it was a lot of academic institutions, potentially because those numbers are out in the world and you can find them. But I did think that was very interesting, and I liked seeing a lot of places getting burned for those tweets. But it's hard to have these conversations without money and financial support too, right? And I think that money is one of those things that we still all don't want to have conversations about. I know even when I was at Quill and Choir doing salary surveys, it was very revealing. There within publishing too, there's still disparities. And I'm not sure that those have been addressed in any sort of way since the last one that I've done. So, I mean, it's everywhere. So, I'm kind of curious, how does how does publishing work to break this bias? Like as a, you know, first of all, we'll look at like maybe, you know, publishers, writers, booksellers, like sort of that industry part of it. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about what readers can do as well. Because I think there's probably people listening who would like to, you know, help that with their book purchases too. So anybody have any thoughts on the publishing industry? And
Well, I think that publishing is more than publishing. Publishing is helping. It's like one of the pathways for how we want this country to be. It is a pathway for how we want the world to be. The stories that publishers choose to publish help navigate that pathway forward. The stories then that booksellers choose to promote in bookstores help to navigate that pathway forward. There's books sitting on shelves in bookstores that are absolutely brilliant and can help us as human beings living in this place, Canada, solve a lot of what the challenges are. But they're not getting promoted and they're not getting sold. So then how do we change hearts and minds and spirits to move forward in other ways? And that's what I think is unique in Canada about publishing is there are publishers like Second Story Press who are saying we do more than just create books and sell books. We're helping the landscape of this place we call Canada. And to me, that's really important work. It's really important work.
I was completely, sorry.
Go ahead,
Kai Cheng.
Kate.
I was going to say very much the same thing. I mean, the story of Canada, at least the recorded story, and again, I mostly know about the political story, but what we have for too long celebrated is really the story of older, white, straight, affluent men. And it's a really limited picture about who we are and the stories that we celebrate and the messages that we pass along. It becomes self-fulfilling. You know, I'm particularly interested in political leadership. When you see political leaders who look very much the same, older, white, straight, affluent men, it sends an unconscious or subconscious message to a whole group of people that leadership doesn't look like them. And it's part of the selection problem that we've had in not seeing enough women and a great enough diversity of women running for office, and definitely not rising up to our most senior roles. So the stories we tell about who we are end up shaping who we are. So intentionally making sure that we are exposed to stories and realities that are different from our own, I think is of paramount importance if we're serious about what we're all talking about today, which is breaking that bias.
I just love what everyone has said so far about this. I think something I might add or just build off of is I think we're really lucky to have presses like Second Story. I know I'm deeply in love with my own publishers, Arsenal Pulp and Metonymy Press, who have been, Metonymy is a bit newer, but Arsenal Pulp and Second Story have for, I think, decades now been really breaking new ground in terms of who they're willing to publish and what stories they'll take risks on. And, you know, Metonymy is newer, but also still really doing that. They were my first publisher and have consistently published, I think, almost entirely trans and gender queer people of color. And I guess I would say what I want in publishing is for us to continue to take risks, particularly on the side of editors, acquisition editors, publishers, because we need more of these stories in the world. And you know, it's just sort of a truism in the industry that bigger publishers are more interested or are looking more carefully at so-called, you know, marketability or commercial viability. And we're starting to see that kind of shift now in terms of who larger publishers are willing to publish and interested in publishing. And so first, I think I really want to celebrate that it was small press and independent booksellers that were willing to take that chance and take that stand first, and then also applaud the brave people in, you know, more mainstream publishing that were then like, okay, it's time to also kind of move the bar. And then to say like, we still have a ways to go in terms of taking risks and publishing diverse voices, because what I see now, and maybe this is just the way that the process works, I don't know, but what I see is, you know, sometimes I think there is an interest in publishing diverse voices because there's a hashtag, you know, diverse voices, or because, you know, hashtag own voices has become important in certain parts of like genre book industry, that it's this idea that like, ooh, like diversity is good. We sort of know that. And fashionable among certain sources, among certain markets. But we need more than one kind of diverse story. We need stories that are daring as well, not just in terms of the identities of the characters in them and the people who write them, but that are also daring about the message they have about, how this country, this thing called Canada, really needs to change, not just so that, we're all, diverse people living in the way that those rich old white men wanted us to live, but that we're really relating to one another differently in an ethical sense and in an environmental sense. So more risk taking. And as readers, I would really just encourage you all out there to make your thirst for those kinds of daring stories known, to demand that kind of work, because I think that's the way that we all start to get more brave about what we're willing to put out there and willing to stand behind.
Yes.
And it's going to change because, publishers like Orca Book Publishing, right? In some ways, like a real reciprocal relationship with Second Story Press. They're publishing books for these young citizens, like your little person in the tub there, Kate.
Yeah.
At 18 months, they're reading books already about children who don't look like them, who have a very different lived experience. They might see another language on the page, so that when they get to high school, their breadth of understanding the world is going to be so different. And we have to be prepared that there's books ready for them, right? That stories are ready for them, because otherwise they're going to be really mad at us. Like, you gave us all this rich stories when we were little, and then now what? There's this big gap. So I think we got to think about that also.
And I think if I could just add on that point, like there is this generation of babies that have been born in a very unusual moment. So, and my partner and I were quite worried about this. We're welcoming this baby in a time where, in the heat of the lockdowns where you can't leave your home, and we certainly do not want her to only be exposed to two white, heterosexual, fairly similar from an education and so on background. How do we open the world to her when the world is really closed? And we've been extra focused on what are those resources, what are those stories, perspectives that we can bring into her little world. And I hope that there is this generation of kids who, even though they grew up or they were born and had those initial formative months and times where they're very isolated, that they do have this different perspective on the world that I hope is broader and more connected and more curated based on the kinds of stories that we know publishers like Second Story are now putting out.
It's interesting because all of you have put out books for younger audiences at different levels. And I'm kind of wondering, is this why you were drawn to doing this in the first place? Like, how did that come about for each of you in terms of writing for kids?
I'm laughing a bit because in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, what author writes a children's book who isn't really writing for the child in themselves? I don't think we can help but do that. I used to be a therapist, and so I'm always kind of thinking in that way. But I think every woman who writes a children's book is in some way writing to her own inner child. And dreaming about how the past might have been different. If she had read that book at a younger age, that's what I did when I wrote my first children's book. And then also somehow thinking about the future. I think both Monique and Kate, you were speaking to that really beautifully about how books can shape our perception of the world and what we want to do in the world. And in the case of some children who aren't lucky to have supportive families or communities, I think also those books really actually can save lives. And I say that because books saved my life as a child in that way. So yes, absolutely. That's why I got into writing children's books for the child in myself and all the future little children out there who might, I don't know if my book I'd say my book is saving lives, but hopefully it is providing some inspiration and some comfort.
That's lovely.
Well, for me, a lot of this writing happened when I was pregnant. I'm a political scientist. I usually write really boring stuff, like for, you try to get published in academic places, and it's fairly dry. It's a very different style of writing, but I'd done this project where I talked to all of the women who had reached our most senior political roles, and they all had amazing stories about when they were young and the kind of change they wanted to make in the world. And so as I found out that I was having a child, and I originally thought about writing this for my own child, but thought, I hope that the kids of Canada know that they don't need to wait until they have that big political role, that they can make the change they want to see in the world around them right now, and give them some good examples, and again, of leaders who I don't think get the kind of celebration that they deserve in our normal political science and history classes. So for me, that's where also sort of an unexpected path, but that's where a kid's book came from.
That's so lovely. I have more questions for you in a bit about that. I'm some curiosity about your book, but yeah, Monique, what about you?
I never ever thought I'd write children's book. I thought, actually, honestly, after Tilly, A Story of Hope and Resilience came out, I was like, okay, all done.
I'm done.
And then I was doing some training one day at a Head Start, and I was training with the adults, and then the children joined us at lunchtime. And there was this little one who just kind of hung out at the door a little bit longer looking for their person. And then ran over to their cookum, their grandma, and she took his face in her hands like this, and she looked at him with so much love. His whole body changed. And what I saw was his heart filled with happiness. And it was the inspiration for my book, My Heart Fills with Happiness, illustrated by the incredible Julie Flett, published by Orca Book Publishing. And the whole book came to me about 2 weeks later. I was in a meeting and it just came. And so that was kind of the door opener for children's books. And what I really wanted, it's interesting, when you were talking Kai Cheng, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if I write for my little child. Mostly what I was thinking about was my niece, Brianna. My children were older at the time, but also all those little children who haven't seen themselves in a book before. Who, when the book gets read and they talk about Bannock, they're like, oh, I know what Bannock is. And they're the only one in class who knows what Bannock is. And they probably had it for breakfast, right? And they get to actually educate the other kids. So I think children's books and picture books are useful not only for children, but also for adults. Yeah, they're a door opener for conversations.
I don't think we can address bias or one that I don't think it's addressed as so much as older women. And that is one thing I think tends to drop off, which is one of the reasons why I love your book, Tilly and the Crazy Eights. Like, it's such a fun book. And I think we also forgot about humor. Like, there's a lot of humor in that book. And so, why did you want to tell the stories of these women?
Oh, well, for one of the reasons is because I wanted the reader to understand that our elders are vibrant, that they're joyful, that they love shenanigans, that they love their cheesies, and they have thorns. And their tongues might not be kind all the time also because of the hurt that's happened to them. But I didn't want readers to just think elders are a certain way. I wanted them to understand the fullness. And these elders were such joy for me to write after writing Speaking Our Truth. Speaking Our Truth was a hard book for me to write. And so Tilly and the Crazy Eights was medicine for me as well. And there were things that these elders did that I didn't have in my outline. I'd be typing and then something would unfold and I'd be like, oh, so we're adding that to her, are we? Okay. And then I'd keep typing and I'd be crying because it was like their stories are so powerful and their ability in the face of things that I don't know if I'd be able to get back up from, they do. And they still can laugh, and they can still tease each other, and they can still take risks, and they can still try new things. And to me, that's just awesome. Mm-hmm.
It's such a lovely book. Yeah, my favorite.
Thank you.
And am I correct in saying that you are currently adapting Braiding Sweetgrass?
Yes. So.
Wow.
ratings. The second edits have just gone in, and it's being adapted for 9 and up. And about a third of the content is making it in. So that was fun, just to go from 460 pages to not just over 200, which include illustrations by the incredible Nicole Neidhart.
Oh my goodness.
So it'll be out November 1st. And it's been, other than Tilly and the Crazy Eights, it's been the most joyous project I've worked on. I said to my wife one night, just when I think I've finished one chapter and I can't work on a more beautiful one, then I start on this one and it's even more beautiful. So, and what the design team is doing at Learner Books is just, it's going to be a beautiful book with what they're doing with it. And it's Robin Wall Kimmerer's words.
What an amazing project. What do you have to sort of keep in mind when you're adapting for a young audience?
Language, worldviews. Even if you think about, the book came out in 2013, how much has changed across North America, understanding Indigenous people, land acknowledgements, like so much has changed. Even so, that adaptation in there, pulling out so that if young people, because also you think young people, not always, but just the way they've been raised, their attention span is shorter than what we were raised to be in. So putting little sidebars so people are just quickly flipping through, 1 or 2 sentences pop out. So just thinking a lot also about the other piece that I've woven in a lot is social emotional literacy into the book as well.
Oh, okay.
So really adding that element about how does Indigenous wisdom, knowledge of the plants, and scientific knowledge influence our social and emotional learning.
So it sounds like another book that is for children, but really is also...
It has lots of entry points.
That's wonderful. That's so great.
Yeah.
Kate, I am wondering about your entry point into politics. Did you have, when you were growing up, did you have mentors or people who got you excited? How did you take this path?
No, so my first political experience as a kid, my parents were both teachers. I grew up in a small town during the, not to get too political here, but during the Mike Harris years when there were big cuts to education. I found myself on the picket lines of my parents, and it was the first awareness I came to that politics matters, that the decisions people were making miles and worlds away had an impact on us. So I ended up I became a public servant and spent 10 years working in local government, and then was asked the question many women are asked to get off the sidelines and step in to run, to which I said no, just like most women do. And was really pushed on, these are the issues you're talking about. You want to see more women in politics. You care about mental health. You care about climate change and transportation. What are you prepared to do? And so in 2017, I quit my job and I decided I'd run for politics. And that experience ended up leading to projects like the books we're talking about tonight.
Interesting. So I have to imagine, we see how female politicians and members of the media are treated online. At what point do you think we start preparing young aspiring politicians that, there's some realities that maybe aren't as wonderful? Does that come later in the process?
Well, to go back just a little bit, so I ran for a party that was led by our first female premier, the first openly gay premier in Ontario, and heard a ton of comments I would describe as being sexist and homophobic in the 50,000 doors I knocked on in that election, and was surprised after the campaign to find that we've had more than 300 first ministers, only 13 at the time, 14 now have been women. And they last half as long as men. They come in difficult circumstances. And when they run for re-election, they lose. So in a country where we re-elect incumbents all the time, we've never re-elected a female first minister. So I went and asked these women about their experiences. And we turned it into a podcast and now 2 books. And they were incredibly honest about how very difficult it is. They talked about, if issues in their marriages, mental health, impacts on their kids, sense of self-confidence, sometimes very death threats and threats to personal safety, in addition to all of the political difficulties that we have put in our culture and in our institutions in their way. So the podcast was the first project to share that. And we did have a bit of a thoughtful discussion at the beginning to say, exactly what you just said. If we tell people this, will particularly women and a greater diversity of women not want to run for politics? But, I tend to lean on the side of this does not change unless we start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really liberating actually to hear the women who've reached our top political roles talk about the kinds of barriers that they face, including internal barriers, confidence, and so on, imposter syndrome. It's really liberating to hear someone who, Rachel Notley experiences that too. Mm-hmm. So, myself as when you're running for the first time, knowing that that's an experience that's shared, I think there's some power in that. And we will just have to rest on that until it changes. And it will not change until we see our elected bodies naturally start looking more like Canada. That was a long answer.
Sorry. That was great. That's perfect. No, and it I'm glad that that is out there. And I, to be honest with you, I don't think I knew that until I read your book, that there were 13. I know a few, mm-hmm. But so I think there's a lot of education among us all. And social media certainly is clouding that conversation right now. I just want to ask Kai Cheng a couple questions. I love your advice column in Extra. I follow it all the time.
Really? Oh my gosh. I'm late on it this week.
If your editor's there, it's coming, right?
Yeah, it'll come.
You make everything seem so accessible, but also possible. And I think in your book of essays too, I think in I Hope We Choose Love, you're very honest with your writing and the problems that you see also within your own community. And I'm just wondering, how do you prepare to put that out into the world and emotionally? It must be a hard thing to do.
Oh, I love that question. And I love that. I'm always shocked when I hear that someone reads my advice column. I don't know why. I'm really? Cool.
I love advice columns.
People keep on sending in the questions, so they must be reading the advice. I don't know. It's funny you should say that. I think to be an out queer woman, an out trans woman, is to prepare to put one's heart on one's sleeve every day when we walk out in the world. And that's differently true, at different levels for each individual person. But, I think that really is for me what has prepared me to be vulnerable and truthful in my work. I was joking a bit earlier before we started the panel that it's my birthday this coming weekend and I'll be turning 31. And that's a shock to me because long ago I heard the statistic that trans women on average die around the age of 23, 24, which turns out not to be true, but I believed it, which, is, again, kind of a reminder, what are we telling young people as they grow up? What kind of narratives are we putting out there? And so I thought, I'd better transition before I die at 23 or 24, and I'd better write a book. And I might as well write whatever I want because I might not be around for that much longer to write the next book and get closer to my truth. And, I don't think I'm really alone in that. I think women writers of color, I think trans women writers, I think disabled women writers, I think marginalized writers of all kinds who are women are also thinking about this, how long am I going to live? And how much time do I have to tell my story? So that's what prepares me to be as courageous as I can. And I think that's the courage of, all the women who came before me writing books and advice columns. And, hopefully those who come after won't need that kind of courage. It'll be a different kind.
What an incredible amount of pressure to have, put on you. So at such a young age.
Yeah, it was a lot. I was a psychotherapist for youth for a fair amount of time, and worked primarily with queer and trans youth, mostly racialized as well. And I think young queer and trans people, in particular among the marginalized, have a specific kind of pressure because there's a secret involved in being queer or trans for most young people growing up. And there was for me, for sure, this pressure of like, I am something, I don't always have the word for it, and I know that inside, that's different from what the outside believes or wants me to be. And the pressure of those two things pushing up against each other, you know, I have a secret and I need to reveal it. If I do, I might be murdered or lose my family. That's that has been challenging for me, and it's been a real gift. Like, I have a lot of privilege that allows me also to be so, you know, kind of out and mostly proud. And that's what I, you know, that's also the courage and the pressure that I see all those young people walking around with too. And yeah, I think that when I'm brave, when I can be, I'm not always, my hope is that it makes more room for all the others.
We have a couple questions, and one actually I think follows nicely from this about, you know, loving this discussion, especially Kai Cheng's comment about books that save your life. So asking, are there books or an author that each of you would recommend that has saved your life? Or maybe one that's maybe not saving your life, or maybe meaningful to you in some sort of way that you've held on to.
I mean, I'll go ahead and say, you know, there's a lot of books that have saved my life, but one that maybe is particularly relevant to International Women's Day is Bell Hook's All About Love. That book saved my life the first time I read it, and I think it kind of saves my life every time I read it again. So that's Bell Hooks, you know, who, you know, as lots of folks out there will know, was an incredibly seminal, powerful, famous Black woman scholar, academic, activist, who also, I believe, passed away very recently. Yeah. And All About Love is her treatise on, first of all, what love is, and she, you know, draws upon her lived experience as a Black woman and also as a, you know, longtime scholar to define love. And I mean, what really was powerful about that book is she didn't equivocate. She wasn't like, oh, you know, there's some love that's violent. It was like, no, love is never violent. And that was really powerful and life-changing for me.
My mind immediately went to Bell Hooks as well. And again, especially as I'm listening, Kai Cheng, to yours, I also am very aware of the privilege that I have. I have never felt my life was in danger in the way that you just articulated so beautifully, and, you know, have not relied on books and other stories in the same way. For me, like, so, you know, Bell Hooks writing, for example, has been really more about broadening my own understanding of my own privilege and just being very aware of the things that have benefited me at the expense of others. So yeah, that's one example, but many come to mind where it's really about understanding a perspective and understanding realities that are different from my own. And for me, that's been the primary way of learning about my own enormous privilege, that I am of a settler on this land.
For me, I was in nursing school, and I don't even know how I got the book. It might have been from my friend Dolly Albert. She was the only other Indigenous student in nursing school. I was in psychiatric nursing. And I got the book by Lee Miracle called Bobby Lee, Indian Rebel. And I remember I was like, oh, well, that looks interesting. And then one night I had an assignment due, and I was like, oh, that book looks really interesting instead of the assignment. And I couldn't put it down, because it was literally the first time on a page that I saw some of my own lived experience that I hadn't been able to articulate before. On this page, I was like, oh my God, yes, I know that. Oh my gosh, yes, I feel that too. And it was so validating. So Lee Miracle's work is for sure one author that, and just similar, you know, it's interesting that both her and Bell Hooks transitioned over to the other side not very long ago, each of them. But I think of it this way. I think of this with Eden Robinson for me as well. They're like, when you go hiking or you go in the forest and there's a person at front who holds the tree branches behind you so you can come through without getting smacked. That's what I feel like Eden Robinson and Lee Miracle and Bell Hooks have done for me. And I think for a lot of us authors is they've forged the path and held those branches. So we might still get smacked, but we don't get quite as hard as we would have previously.
That's so lovely.
And I think then it's also our responsibility, or I see it as my responsibility to do that for the authors that are up and coming as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading Barbara Gowdy's early short stories for the first time and realizing that things could be messy and erotic and gross, and like all of these things could happen within it. Like a woman could be so many different things, and any, after growing up on, your steady diet of Anne of Green Gables and like Sweet Valley Pies, right? It was like, whoa,
Barbara Gowdy in particular showcases that range. Yes.
Yeah, that was a lesson. So, so somebody is asking, because you both written for, we've got a few minutes left here, that you've all written for adults and kids, and wondering if it's harder or more fun to write a feminist book for kids or adults.
I can start. I think kids is way more fun. The writing I found harder. The release has been way more fun. So we've been doing events hosted by public libraries with female leaders and sometimes huge numbers of kids. And it's a conversation starter, as has been said, and the kinds of things that kids today care about in the world around them. It is enormously inspiring to hear kids identify things that they want to see change. So I found that to be the great joy of this whole process, is actually after the book is done and it's in someone's hands and they all of a sudden have a question or a passion or a thing that they would like to do in the world, and feeling like I've played a small part in leading to that discussion has been a ton of fun. Like, fun doesn't even describe it. Truly joyful. It's wonderful.
So what about you guys?
I find writing children's books hard because there's so few words, and so they have to be not exact, but it's more of a discipline for me to write a children's book than it is to write a novel. I'll leave it there.
Totally agree with you. Like, under 1,000 words, what are you saying? Like, God, gotta go do character and plot and all that time. And then I guess I do also find it more fun, so it's more difficult, but also more fun. Partly because mischievously, I think I agree with someone on this panel said earlier, like, books for kids are also in some way for adults, and for sure, right? Like when you think about who's reading the book to the kid, it's the adult. So I really love thinking about like what is the angle of the adult who's reading the book, and like how are they experiencing reading the book, usually in relation to a child. So that's really fun to think about. And it's funny, my first book for children was about like a shape-shifting non-binary child and their mother. And I mean, kids will often say to me, like, that was fine, they liked it, but parents will weep, right? They will cry when they talk about the book. And I think that's just so fun, like that a children's book can be, it's like a more relational experience than a book for adults.
That's so lovely. I wanted just to wrap this up, just shift it just a little bit to not about books, but I think it's been so it's been a hard 2 years, so I'm kind of curious, something fun that you have all done or have really enjoyed, and it can be anything. I don't believe in guilty pleasures, like it's all up, we're all friends here. So yeah, what have you guys been enjoying amongst all of this chaos?
I'll go. Working in the garden and listening to an audiobook, and an audiobook that is NIN, no intelligence needed. Yeah. So, being out there working a little bit, but just being absorbed in a story that doesn't require me to be present. So if I go away for 3 minutes, I don't really miss anything poignant usually.
I love it.
This is
you first, Kate.
This is gonna make me sound like a really boring human, but I love travel. I love thinking about travel. I love planning travel. I love going on trips. Of course, that's not been possible in the last 2 years, and so my substitute has been there's a whole genre of YouTube videos called scenic relaxation, which are no words, just travel videos of places in the world. And so I sometimes will get a bottle of wine, maybe even from a place, and then sit and watch, the Alps and have a bath and imagine that on a trip. So that's been about as exciting as it's gotten for me over the last 2 years.
Mine is a more like later on in the pandemic kind of pleasure, post-vaccine and like kind of figuring out how to do things more safely. I did with like a small pod of people get into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's like a grappling martial art form that is also like quite like brutal sometimes, but of course, like, you do it in fun and trust. And I have to say, like in my day job, I do conflict mediation. It's all about like peace and love, and my message in the world is about love, but there is something incredibly satisfying, I would say, maybe especially as a woman and a feminist woman, about just a time where you get to consensually strangle someone and it's all going to be okay at the end.
I was in Canadian Tire because I saw that they had boxing gloves on sale. I don't know why. Like, I don't know what I was going to hit, but you put those on and it feels really good. It's just knocking a box. But anyway, I'm glad you guys have found things that have brought you some peace or joy or fun over this, and as much as your books have to other people. I want to thank you, Kate, Monique, and Kai Cheng, for a really great event and discussion. It really was a pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. And don't forget to pick up copies of the author's books from your local library or indie bookstore. And I think that the raffle will happen after the event is over, so you'll be hearing if you won. But I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and thanks again, and stay safe. Take care.
Happy International Women's Day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.